It's been a long time, yeah. It's been a long time, yeah. You and me used to be. You and me.
So when I first moved into this house, downstairs was just a spot where we put all the kids' toys, plus there was an empty spare bedroom. However, since I have this problem where I can't sit still, over the past 12 months I've documented every single thing I've done down here. In today's video, I'm bringing all the best projects together into one long build, so that anyone who's interested can watch the entire process from beginning to end and hopefully come away with a few ideas you might want to try yourself. So 2 years ago, I made my first ever gaming room setup, and that video currently has over 5 million views. Now, we recently moved to a new house, and this setup that I'm about to build from scratch, I'm hoping will blow your mind and leave you speechless. So without further ado, let's begin. The first project I'm going to be tackling is coming up with the DIY RGB dual channel desk mod. I did a ton of research, and if you're wanting anything 80 inches or above for a sit-stand desk, your options become very limited. I ended up going with an 83 by 30 inch desk from a company called Vivo. They were one of the few companies that checked every box I was looking for, which was an all-white option for both the table and frame. I wanted a thicker 1-inch top compared to the standard 0.6, and if anyone else wants to try doing what I'm about to do themselves, I didn't want this to be outrageously priced. And Vivo is one of the most affordable options when it comes to office products. Now, I actually already made a dedicated video on just this desk build that you can check out if you're interested in the full details, but for the sake of time, I'll go over the key points. I'm using some individually addressable cob LEDs from BTF Lighting for both the two upper profiles and the channels on the legs. I'll be soldering my own wires to the beginning, which will help with cable management because I can then place the controllers wherever I want and run the wires to wherever they are. I'll be running the LED strips and the diffuser channels around the perimeter, and this is always one of my favorite parts when things are starting to come together. But it's always a little shocking when you see just how many wires something like this results in. And going back to my cable management, I'll leave links in the description to my favorite clips and tools that I always use in my builds to make everything disappear. Now to control the lights, I'll be using some of my favorite WLED plug-and-play controllers from Glidopto and from Meg WLED. So again, watch the full video I made if you want the complete breakdown, but we're definitely off to a good start. There's 3 power supplies, 4 controllers, 36 loose wires, a power strip, a couple soap boxes, and there's not a single thing out of place or hanging down. But with this complete, it's now time to move on to the next part of our build. Now, some people will go into a project with a concrete plan, but I'm more of a try stuff out and see how it looks type of guy. In this area right here, I'm going to start by building a frame made out of some 1 by 2 inch pieces of wood. It's not going to be bearing much weight, so I'm only worried about finding one stud in the horizontal pieces. And in order to sink the screws below the surface, I'm pre-drilling a shallow hole using a Forstner bit. Once I have the first layer on, I'm going to be doing the exact same thing and putting 2 more pieces of wood on each side. So essentially, we're building a frame that will jet out about 3 inches from the wall. Next, I made a quick stop at IKEA, which is fortunately not too far from where I live. I have a couple ideas that I want to try out using some of their stuff that I've yet to see anyone ever do. It could be a complete disaster, but that's part of the fun. I got home and moved the desk out of the way to clear up some space to start working. Now, I noticed a while back that IKEA's floating wall shelves were all the same depth and width no matter what size you got, and that got me wondering if I could make one big rectangular type box with multiple units combined. I first got everything set up on a couple sawhorses, and sure enough, everything lined up perfectly with all the sides, both front and back, being flush with each other. Next, I used some clear drying Gorilla Glue and some clamps to secure all sides together. And make sure to have a damp paper towel or cloth handy because once you tighten the clamps, you'll have a little glue coming out from the sides that you'll want to clean up. I'll let that dry for about 24 hours, but in the meantime, going back to me winging things, I realized I don't really like the placement of the wooden frame that I just hung up, so I went ahead and took it down and moved it slightly down and to the right. And that's just sometimes how it goes, because you'll never really know how something looks until it's up, and I've definitely had my fair share of these moments. Moving on, I did the exact same thing with their smaller length floating shelves to make another rectangular box. I glued that up the same way as the first one and let that dry for 24 hours. So of course I had a bunch of screw holes in the wall from where I moved the frame, and I used some spackling to fill everything in. I let it dry and then gave it a light sand so that the wall is ready to paint whenever I want to do that. It was now time to hunt for a large sheet of acrylic. I found some at Menards, and if you're from the Midwest, that name should sound very familiar. And I will say, if you can find already frosted acrylic in this type of size for a reasonable price, please let me know because it would have saved me a few steps. But as it stands, this stuff is clear as glass, which means we have to frost it ourselves. I took it outside and used an orbital sander with 320 grit paper and spent the next few hours sanding both sides. I I think I ended up doing each side 4 times while cleaning off the dust after each pass. It's for sure a labor of love, but I'm hoping the end result will be worth it. And for anyone unfamiliar with this technique, light will pass right through a clear material, but when you sand the acrylic, it scratches the surface and makes it so the light bounces around and you can see the actual color. Once the sanding was done, I needed to cut this into 2 pieces that would fit the exact size of the 2 rectangular cubbies we just built using the floating shelves. I borrowed my brother-in-law's table saw, and with the help of Big Blue, I was able to make the cuts. I rinsed them one final time with a hose to get off any remaining dust, and I thought this was a cool shot being able to see how it's clear, but as it dries, it gets cloudy, which will hopefully act as a great diffuser in our build. Next, I cut some more 1x2 sections of the wood to perfectly match the perimeter of the square cubbies that we built. And this will all start to make sense here soon, but as I'm looking at the back, the space between the edge of the wood and the edge of the white shelf is a little too close. I need more space for what I have in mind, so it's back to the table saw to cut off small sections from each of the long pieces and cut all together new pieces and trim those for the shorter sections to again perfectly wrap the perimeter. So with the now thinner sections, you can see there is a little bit more space, which is exactly what I wanted. I'll then be taking these same pieces of wood that we measured to fit the cubbies and screwing them into the walls. This was pretty simple to do, with the most time-consuming part making sure everything was level. I also used the same Forstner bit to sink the screws into the wood to make everything flush and to help avoid any splitting, since I cut these sections somewhat skinny. And there's really no precise location I'm wanting these to go, so I'm just putting them up to where I think might look good once everything is said and done. Now, one of the things that separates a good setup from a great setup is how well you're able to hide wires and cables. I'll be using a 3/4 inch Forstner bit to drill a hole in the sheetrock to where I know I'll be needing to feed some wires into, and I'll have them exit right above the baseboards. I've learned from experience that hiding cables makes a huge difference, and it's absolutely something I'd recommend doing if you're trying to create the best looking setup possible. I'll be doing the same thing on the other 2 frames that I have set up in the room, so I'm ready for when it's time to install the LEDs. And for this awkward space under the overhang of what I can only assume to be some vent work, I'll set up just a normal floating shelf since I have a fun idea on how I want to light up this dark area. So to mount the big display, I had an idea. Since the small sections have the brackets already installed, I thought it would be easiest to see if I can mount it using those. I measured the exact placement of where these were and marked them on the top wooden piece that I already have secured in the wall, where I was able to hit 1 stud, plus I used a drywall anchor. I then used 2 screws at the exact locations I had marked out, and lo and behold, I was able to mount the cabinet on the wall for this quick test. I was super happy that my idea worked, and now I can take it down and continue with my full plan, and that of course will involve lots of custom LED lighting. BTF became the first company to offer the incredible 12-volt SK6812 individually addressable LEDs on Amazon. And even though these just came out, I already used them in a video I recently did on how to install and set up motion activated lighting on your garage that turned out amazing. So these were again the obvious choice for this project. They have a dedicated white LED to go along with all the RGB options. It has 60 LEDs per meter, which is what you need for a spotless effect. They remain individually addressable for smooth animations, and they're 12 volts, so you can do longer runs without needing to inject power. These also might be the most solder-friendly strips available. Here I have them right above the 5-volt SK6812 strips, and the copper pads in the 12-volt variants are much larger, giving you more real estate for connecting your own wires for custom installs. Next, I'll be going over what I'll be doing to prep the strips. I'll first take out my all-in-one soldering kit, and if you're curious on what this is or how to get it, I'll leave a link in the description you can check out. I'll be cutting off the first LED and then applying some solder to the 3 copper pads on the strip. And using this USB-C battery pack to heat the iron, it can get up to about 700 degrees Fahrenheit. But for stuff like this, I'm generally keeping it at about 600 degrees. I will mention though that the kit comes with lead-free solder, but I still prefer my leaded solder, and this stuff from Kester is the best I've ever used. Next, I'll be prepping my own wires to attach to the strip. This will give me the flexibility to have my controller and power further away from the start of the lights. And I recommend to use more than you think you'll need because you can always cut them shorter later. And to make this project as easy to follow, I'll keep everything as consistent as possible. Red will always be power, green will be data, and white or black will be ground or negative. Now I don't want to take up too much more time going over every detail of soldering and getting the wires attached to the strip, so I'll speed through this part. But just know that I already made a couple how-to solder videos that goes over everything I'm doing here with close-up footage and extreme detailed commentary that I'll link in the description if you're interested in learning this simple skill. Learning how to solder when it comes to LED projects gives you so much more freedom in creating anything you can think of because you no longer have to rely on finding that perfect solder-free connection that may not even exist for what you need it to do. So for running my LED strip wires through the wall, we have to go fishing. Lots of different ways and tools you could use, but I've had great luck with the Magnapole. If you have some tightly packed insulation, you'll probably want to use one of these two very strong magnetic cleats to get through to the bottom. But for this interior wall in my basement that has no insulation, the simple magnetic chain is usually the easiest way to go. Just tape your wires to the end, drop it down the hole, and use the magnetic wheel on the outside to guide it down to where you need it, and then I just usually use a tweezers to retrieve the chain. From here, it's as simple as pulling the chain, which will feed our wires that we soldered to the beginning of the strip down to the bottom opening, where we'll eventually be able to connect it to our power and controller. I then did the exact same thing with the other two openings I'd previously made in the other areas. Next, I'll be sticking the LED strips along the inside perimeter of each of our 3 frames that we have on the wall. The goal here is to get it as close to the outer edge as possible, which is going to help with our lighting effect. And even though I'm starting each of these in the lower left corner and going clockwise, it really doesn't make any difference, so don't worry if you end up going in a different direction or have a different starting point. Now, if you watch my channel, you also know I love to do a lot of projects with Govi's plug-and-play lighting, but for stuff like this where you need precise lengths and you want a very specific type of LED lighting effect, going this more DIY route is absolutely the way to go. But I realize not everyone has the time or desire to go this in depth, so I'm absolutely glad companies like Govi exist to fill that space. Moving on, we can finally bring back out the frosted acrylic. And if you remember, I cut this down to size so it would fit the entire backside. Once I have it lined up, I'm going to make a small mark at what will be the lower left-hand corner when we have it up, and use a small Forstner bit to make a hole through the acrylic. You'll see why I'm doing this here in a little bit. Next, I'll be drilling 4 small pilot holes and then using a Forstner bit to create a small recess so the screws will again sit flush with the surface. And this acrylic isn't super thick, so make sure you don't go too deep. And I ended up just doing 4 screws, 1 in each corner to hold the acrylic in place. Before getting this remounted, I'll be running another set of 3 wires through the same hole on top down to the bottom, because I'm going to eventually be adding another LED strip to this unit, but this is where I need to run these wires from the top through the small hole we just cut out of the acrylic. So I can finally get this put back up in the wall, and if you're not quite sure what's going on, we now have the frosted acrylic as our backing to this unit, but since the wooden frame pushes it out about an inch, that gives us just enough space for the LEDs that we lined around the inside perimeter of the wood to backlight the cubby, which will hopefully provide for some awesome visuals. For the smaller unit, I'll be doing things slightly different. I'll first get the extra wires fed through the top hole just like before. Now to get this one mounted, I'll be using one of the included sections that will slide into the top shelf circular cutouts, but to do this, I need to drill a couple holes in the acrylic for it to fit. Since that looks good, I'll get the acrylic secured the same way using the 4 screws, 1 at each corner like I did on the first one. Next, make sure the black mounting hardware is perfectly centered on the top piece of wood and get it screwed in. Now I also did the same little cutout on the acrylic at the bottom left side so I can feed the additional wires through, so after that's done, it's time to slide things in place, and thankfully, this mounting method also appears to work well. So you're probably wondering what I'll be doing with this third frame on the right side. The first thing is painting the inside and outside parts of the wood. I probably should have done this before putting on the lights, which would save me some painter's tape, but I'm not always the best at thinking ahead. Once dried, I'll take off the blue tape that was covering the LEDs, and you'll see here shortly why I didn't need to paint the outer face. One of the items I picked up at IKEA was their pegboard. This requires a simple bracket to be screwed into the wall like I'm doing here, and then the actual board can be secured into part of the bracket. Next, I got some 4-inch wide MDF trim pieces that I cut down to size that I'll be putting together in a picture frame type look to cover the exposed wood pieces. I'll again be using the Forstner bit to sink the screws since I'll be covering these holes up to give it a clean finish. When everything's in place, it really does give it a polished look, and I'm excited to see how it'll turn out with the lights on. Now if you remember, I ran some extra wires through the acrylic, and it's time for me to get those attached to some more LED strips. I'll again be using the same 12-volt SK6812 LEDs, which will keep everything easy when it comes time to choose a controller and power. I'll then be doing the same thing on the other unit with another roll of the SK6812 LEDs. And this is another great example of how this portable soldering kit comes in handy with stuff like this. So for these new lights, I'll be sticking them on the outermost part of the inside edge on each of the cubbies and working my way around clockwise. Doing this will allow me to choose between backlighting things I have displayed or lighting them in the front or both at the same time. I like having options, and this will give me the best of both worlds. And here's a closer look at what I just did so you can get a better idea of what I'm trying to do. So to save us from spending more money on diffuser channels, I'm going to try going about hiding these currently exposed LEDs in a different way. I'll first be lining the entire perimeter of these cubbies with that double-sided sticky tape I used on the desk. And ironically, I'm going to be using the same flat trim piece that I used on the desk to frame this in and overlap the edge and hopefully conceal the LEDs enough to where they're not visible from the front. I'll finish up the other wall unit and then zoom in so you can see what effect this has on hiding those inside perimeter LEDs. Now if you've been paying attention, you know that we still have the ugly wooden frame pieces exposed in the back. I'll use some more trim pieces and the same sticky tape to cover these up. This is going to obviously make it blend in better with the wall, but it's also going to cover up any light leak that there might be out the sides of the frosted acrylic panels that we installed on the back side, so this step is taking care of two problems at once. Moving on, my idea to light up this shelf and provide what will hopefully be a special component to this oddly shaped corner area is to run some LED diffuser channels up and along the top area here. I'm using Muzada's brand new U109 spotless channels here compared to the U108s I used on the desk. These new ones are slightly wider and they let a little bit more light through while still remaining spotless when using 60 LED per meter strips or more. And these can be cut the same way with the miter saw, but again, make sure to use the tape technique before cutting to avoid the diffuser getting ripped out. To get these mounted, I'll be using some large 3M command strips, but they do come with mounting brackets if you feel more comfortable using those. I'll be doing dual channels side by side going up and around the corner and almost all the way to the end of the back wall area. And this is another part that I'm kind of just going off of a hunch, since in my mind I think it should look cool. For cable management, I'm not entirely sure on what I'm going to be doing yet on that front, but for now I'll be using some cable concealer tracks to hide the wires until I get a game plan together in this area. These work great because I can just drill out an area on the back side and then line that up with the holes where the wires are coming out of and get everything neatly hidden. Now I've been working on this gaming room for a couple days and I can tell my energy is fading, but I'm about to get a huge boost of motivation because my new PC just arrived. So for a little background, I did a ton of research on pre-built PC companies out there because quite frankly, you want to stay away from a lot of them. But after doing a bunch of digging, reading lots of forums, I came across Flying Phoenix PCs and they were super excited to team up with me for this build. Now the reason I went with them, and this is not an error or a glitch, is the fact that they have a perfect 5-star rating on Google with over 450 reviews. And after reading through a lot of the comments, everyone seemed to have had the same great experience dealing with them as I did. So if you're in the market for a PC for gaming or editing or anything else, make sure to check them out as they have options to fit any budget, and clearly they care about their customers. Getting things opened up and they have the GPU packed separately from the PC, and I'm glad they do this, considering this white edition 5080 that I went with cost more than my first two cars combined, which is crazy to say. From there, I'll get the box with the tower in it removed, open that up, and as you can see, everything's packed to perfection. And since there's no easy way to lift this out, I'll generally just cut along the corners and bring it out that way. I'll flip it right side up and then gently get it out of its styrofoam casing. And yes, I went with the O11 Vision because I still think this is the best looking case on the market, followed closely by the Y70 Touch. Now, once I got the side panels off, I started removing the internal packaging that keeps the components safe during shipping. And as you can see, the GPU does need to be installed, but that's super easy to do. This is the opening where it'll go, and you also have to remove the top 3 screws over here for this particular build. Now, for the GPU, I went with the white Zotac 5080, and this thing's absolutely gorgeous. But unfortunately, you definitely pay a premium for white parts, and this card was no exception. I'll go ahead and get this snapped into the opening and then reattach the screws. Then finish up by connecting the PCI cable to the side and you're all set. So again, big shout out to Flying Phoenix PCs for building this absolute beast of a machine. And I really hope this video will end up bringing more attention to your company because you 100% deserve it. Next, we need to talk about monitors, and I really have my heart set on this new 5K 2K LG bendable screen, but the only issue is it's not yet available, and I don't want to spend $2,000 on their fixed curve monitor because if I'm being honest, due to the aggressive curve, it doesn't photograph well in terms of aesthetics. So to hold me over until LG releases their bendable model, I bought the 42-inch LG OLED C5. Now I've heard so many people say that they've loved using the C3 and C4 as their monitor, so I thought this would be a perfect time to give it a try myself. I will say though, if you're a hardcore competitive gamer, you'll probably want more than the 144Hz refresh rate that the C5 provides, but for most people, this will be sufficient. Now, since the C5 is technically a TV, it doesn't come out of the box compatible with VISA adapters, so I picked up this kit. This will allow me to mount the TV to the monitor arm, and the one that I'm using is again from Vivo, which supports up to 33 pounds, with the C5 coming in only at 22. The first thing you do is take the mounting plate from the arm and attach it to the adapter. So because of the RGB mod I did on the desk, I do need to add a little bit of thickness to the underside of the table for the bracket to mount on. You'd also have the option to screw the arm into the table, but since I'm sure I'll be trying out different monitors down the road, I need the flexibility to move things around. From here, I'll bring back the TV and use the black spacers that the kit came with, and then screw on the adapter plate, which already has the mounting bracket on. Once that's done, the bracket will slide into place at the end of the arm, and you can adjust the tension either higher or lower depending on how much the monitor weighs. So the reason I wanted to get the PC and monitor set up like it is now is because I need to start mapping out a path along the back wall where I think it would look good to add some perfectly diffused LED tracks. I want everything to complement the flow I currently have going on, so I'm marking things out with some tape to ballpark where I want to start putting the profiles. I'll speed through this part since it was probably the most time-consuming aspect of the build. I used more of the new U109 profiles, and this required lots and lots of cuts and precise measuring to get everything as straight and clean looking as possible. And I'll again be using 3M sticky pads to mount these. Now as far as my thought process, I want all these lights to almost look as if they're shooting out of where the back of the PC and the desk will be, and at least in my mind, this has the potential to look pretty sweet. I also thought it would be awesome to have the lights split off from one another while two channels go up over the top and then everything meets back up on the left side. It was time for me to go back to the soldering station, and I connected long 18 gauge wires to the beginning of 6 more rolls of the 12 volt SK6812 LEDs. After removing the diffuser cover on our first run, I was able to start getting the strip in the profile. My guess is you may be wondering how I make these 90-degree turns. Well, I'm doing the controversial bend method. And if you're curious on what that is, here's a close-up example of what you do. I've done this in other projects in the past, and 2 years have gone by and I've had 0 issues with doing turns this way, so that's why I don't mind using this approach. You could use corner connecting pieces with these channels because they are wide enough, but that approach leaves a dark spot at the corner where there wouldn't be an LED. Once I got to the end, I cut off the extra lights, snap back on the diffuser covers, and just like that, our first run is done. Now, one thing that's going to help me keep everything straight is taping together the 3 wires from each LED strip, and I'll be labeling this one 1 so that when I get everything connected to the controllers, I don't have 18 wires that I'm trying to sort out. Since the remaining 5 sections are just a rinse and repeat of what I just did, I'll speed through this. You will notice that I get the vacuum out, and that's because when you cut these, little aluminum pieces will shoot out into the channel, so I'm quickly cleaning things up so that the LED strip doesn't have anything in the way when it's sticking to the bottom of the channel. And one of the beauties of using LED strips like this is that you can keep all the leftovers, because they can get used for something else down the road, and I can even solder the strips together to make another long run. You have a lot of flexibility and nothing ends up getting wasted. So this leaves me with a bunch of wires, but I had an idea that I think should work pretty well. I got a little white decorative box that I'll be hanging on the wall by just having it rest on a little piece of wood, and I'm purposely positioning it right over the outlet. And I'll be doing this for both sides. Now my take on this area, since it'll all be under the desk and mostly out of sight, as long as you make everything neat and tidy, I don't think it's worth tearing up the wall even further to do something crazy. So I marked out on the boxes where I'm going to be running the wires through and cut out notches using the table saw. To organize all the wires, I'll be doing epic cable management with some raceway tracks. I'll be using all the included T-joints and corner angle pieces that this kit has to offer to make sure there's not a single wire visible or out of place. I'm basically trying to run everything down towards the baseboard and then over to the box that we just put on the wall and then run them up to where I'll have the controllers and the power supply housed and completely out of sight. I'm also going to be adding our wires from the pegboard project that we did on the sidewall to the tracks and up into the box. And as always, it's super fun when your ideas actually pan out the way you'd hoped. Then it was just a matter of doing the same thing with the other box for the LED strips that I have coming out of both of our wall-mounted cubbies. Moving on, I'll be using one of my favorite WLED plug-and-play controllers from Glidopto. This has everything I could want, including 4 data outputs, a mic, and a built-in 15-amp fuse, among other things. Getting this connected to your LEDs is super easy. Here's your voltage and here's your ground slot, but since we want to take advantage of all 4 data outputs, they include beefy, what looks like 16 gauge red and black wires. Go ahead and connect the red to the voltage opening and then the black to the ground. They also include these Wago connectors, which splits the data and ground. Connect one to the red and the other to the black. Now to make this as easy to understand, let's pretend at the end of each of these 4 groups of wires is where I have one of my SK6812 strips connected. And when I soldered the wires to the strips, the red was always connected to the LED strip's voltage pad, the green was to the middle data, and my white was to the ground. So all I have to do is connect each of my green data lines coming from the LED strip to one of the 4 data openings on the Glidopto controller like I'm doing here. And it doesn't even matter what order they're connected in, since you can change that all in the WLED software. Then you can open up the slots in the Wago connectors, and this is pretty self-explanatory. All my red voltage wires from each LED strip will go into one of the openings that's connected to the voltage Wago, and again, it makes 0 difference which slot you choose. Then all my white ground wires from the LED strip go into the Wago that's connected to the ground on the controller. Last but not least, take your power supply, which has to match the voltage of the LEDs, and plug it into the left side of the controller. For example, since I'm using 12 volt LEDs, I need a 12 volt power supply, and I'll be using a 12 volt 10 amp unit. And I already made full-length getting started videos for both the Glidopto controller and the Mag W LED, so if you're curious on how to get everything set up to work with the LEDs, I'll leave links to those videos in the description. Now, since I have a total of 7 LED strips coming into this box over here, I'll be using 2 of the controllers and 2 power supplies, while over here I'll only need 1 controller and 1 power supply since there's only 4 strips. Next, I wanted to quick clean up the pegboard frame. I bought some white circle stickers to cover up the screw holes to make those disappear, and then I did a little caulking on the corners to fill in the tiny spaces in between the joints. From here, I'm going to start moving the desk into place, but first I'll be wrapping the visible cables from the monitor in white mesh sleeves, and then I'll be putting the PC back into its spot. And I'm absolutely loving the position of the starting point for all the LEDs, because from this vantage point, they look like they're all coming from the back side of the PC. So for this display case over here, I had an idea that I really wanted to try. I took a little hook and screwed it in at the top center area of the cubby. Next, I bought some invisible hanging wire that has a max 4-pound weight limit. Now, you may think I'm crazy about LEDs, but I promise you, my #1 hobby is basketball.
Chris for 3. Step for Chris for 3. Off the right into a 3. Good move. Chris right back to the basket. Chris for 3.
So it shouldn't be too difficult to guess what my favorite anime of all time is, and bonus points for anyone who knows who this character is. My goal is to have some of these incredible figures from the show look like they're levitating midair, and I'm super pumped to see how this looks because the wire is so thin that it pretty much disappears. So with that, you guys have officially made it to the end. And one thing you might not know about me is that 4 years ago, I'd never used a table saw before, I had no idea what an LED strip was, I would have assumed soldering meant laying down grass, and I had no filming or editing experience. So I hope this video will inspire people to try new things, be creative, and realize that the process is part of the fun and what you'll remember most. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoy the final results.
I'm getting tired of all these nightmares. Hold me close, I want you right here. I'm getting tired of all these nightmares. Hold me close, yeah, hold me till I'm not scared. Next to you, everything feels right. Next to you, lost in the midnight. Next to you, everything feels right. Next to you, lost in the midnight. Yeah, I'm getting tired of all these nightmares. Hold me close, yeah, I want you right here.
So I know I've mentioned this a few times, but my wife and I have 5 daughters, and we recently moved to this new house. And for the downstairs area, we've purposely wanted to keep this completely open for the kids to run around, kick balls, play tag, shoot Nerf guns, practice gymnastics, and overall just do what kids do best, which usually involves them breaking stuff. Now, the only problem with this is I also want a spot where we can all hang out as a family and watch movies together, but that involves some very expensive equipment that would 100% be broken within 2 weeks down here. So my challenge in today's video is to build an epic, top-of-the-line, family-friendly entertainment area that'll give me the home theater I've always wanted, but do it in a way that takes up minimal space, keeps the basement an area where the kids can be kids, and I'm not worried about $15,000 worth of equipment getting destroyed. So without further ado, let's begin. Now you can probably see how dirty the walls are in this back nook area, which means the first order of business is to give everything a fresh coat of white paint. And because this is my basement and there's no windows, the white paint is going to help ensure that this area stays bright and cheery. Plus, I'm absolutely going to be adding some custom LED lighting, so it'll be great for that as well. So after about 3 more weeks, everything for the project had finally arrived, and I brought down all the boxes to my basement, which is where the fun begins. So I'll first start unboxing the cabinet, and these are all handmade, so the quality is going to be infinitely better than if you've ever bought a media console off Amazon, Wayfair, IKEA, or any of the other big box outlets. I ended up deciding to go with a matte white finish, and I'm fully aware that it's going to get dirty, and I'll have to clean it frequently, but I wanted it to better fit in with the aesthetics that I'm going for down here. As I move on to the second box, this one's going to be the center part of the unit, and this one has all the mechanisms and moving parts that will automatically open and close with the UST projector. Because this has all those extra components, it is about double the weight of the outer cabinets. And you'll see this later on, but if you're putting this on plush type carpet like I have instead of hardwood floors, due to the weight, you'll need to use some shims to adjust this since it'll sink down lower than the others. And finally, I'll slide the third piece in place. Now these are just butted up against each other, and other than unboxing, there's no assembly required, which is a nice change of pace for me. Moving on to the 120-inch floor rising screen, and this is very heavy and very well packed. And once you get everything out, make sure to stick the included black pads to the 4 movable square metal plates underneath. Using these pads, besides preventing scratches, will raise the underside high enough to slide any cords and wires you might have outside the media console into the cabinet. Next, we'll move on to the projector, and I've wanted the AWOL 3500 Pro for a very long time, but it wasn't until I did a recent video showcasing the Valerian Pro 2 that I was able to get AWOL to send me one. And finally, the last big ticket item is AWOL surround sound system, and like I mentioned before, this is their 4.2.2 setup that becomes 5.2.2 when you use the actual AWOL projector and its 36 watt speaker as the center. So the first thing I did was put the 2 front speakers on the stands that you can get for this model, but I realized that in order to put these on either side, I would have to move the 2 subs out a lot further than I'd like. Now I don't think this looks horrible, and it would certainly be the easiest way to go, but A, speaker mounts like this that are freestanding are a horrible idea when you're trying to kid-proof a setup, and B, my brain was turning and I had an idea that I thought might look pretty cool. These speakers come with the smallest wall mounting system I've ever seen. This black piece gets screwed into your wall, hopefully to a stud, but if not, you have the drywall anchors you can use. Then this little black metal piece gets attached to the back of the unit, and then it slides into the groove right here. So I went to my wall and attached these mounts to either side of the setup using the drywall anchors, and lo and behold, they were actually able to support the weight of the speakers, and they feel pretty sturdy. This will allow me to slide the subs further back, creating a much cleaner look and 100% more kid-proof. Now that I had the framework down, it was time for me to get creative. I first removed the subs, took down the right and left speakers, and moved the cabinet out from the wall to give me space to work behind. Then, since I knew I'd be running a lot of wires into the cabinet, I set aside the screen for now. The first thing I'll be doing is using some 2-meter diffuser channels from a company called Muzada. This is their U108 model, which I've used many times before because it perfectly diffuses LED strips, eliminating hotspots with strips that have at least 60 LEDs per meter. And to get them attached to the wall, I'm only using some removable 3M sticky pads. So my idea is to use that black mounting clip for the speakers as a guide for how far apart to place these. Using a level and butting the right profile up against the black bracket, I'll install this vertical going pretty much up to the ceiling. Then I'll do the same thing with another profile on the left side. I'll do the same thing over here, and in case you're wondering, these profiles are getting placed so that the light is going left and right on the wall, not directly facing outward towards you, which you'll see why I'm doing it this way here in a bit. For this next step, I'm going to be using more of the same profiles, and I'm very fortunate that the previous owners of the house installed some nice thick and chunky baseboards because these profiles are pretty much the same width as those baseboards, which will allow me to install them pointing up with nothing hanging over. And for the corners, make sure you reinforce the cut points with some painter's tape, and you can see how nice the 45-degree angles come together. Moving on to the LED strips, and I'll be using the brand new 12-volt individually addressable SK6812 lights from BTF Lighting. And the reason these are my new favorites is because you still get the benefits of individually addressable LEDs for smooth animations, but the benefit of 12 volt over 5 volt, meaning you can do longer runs without needing to inject power. And these are also probably the easiest LED strip out there if you're learning to solder. Here the 12 volt version is on top and the 5 volt version is on the bottom, and you can see how much bigger the copper pads are, which gives you more real estate to work with. These are the same lights I used on my garage project that turned out great, as well as my new gaming room that I just built, and I'll leave links to both of those videos in the description if you want to check them out. Now, since these strips do take the standard 3-pin JST connector, you could just piecemeal the length needed using those, but I always advocate for people to learn how to solder because it's actually super easy and it gives you so much more options when it comes to projects, and that's exactly what I'll be doing here. I'll first take out my all-in-one soldering kit, and if you're curious on what this is or how to get it, I'll leave a link in the description you can check out. I'll be cutting off the first LED and then applying some solder to the 3 copper pads on the strip. And using a USB-C battery pack, this can get up to about 700 degrees Fahrenheit. But for stuff like this, I'm generally in the 600 degree range. I will mention though that this kit comes with lead-free solder, but I still prefer my leaded solder, and this stuff from Kester is the best I've ever used. Next, I'll be prepping my own wires to attach to the strip. This will give me the flexibility to have my controller and power further away from the start of the lights. And my recommendation is to use more than you think you'll need, because you can always cut them shorter later. And to make this easy to follow, I'll keep everything as consistent as possible. Red will be power, green will be data, and white or black will be ground or negative. Now, I don't want to take 10 minutes going over every detail of soldering and getting the wires attached to the strip, so I'll speed through this part. But just know that I already made a couple how-to solder videos that goes over everything I'm doing here with close-up footage and extremely detailed commentary that I'll link in the description if you're interested in learning this simple skill. Learning how to solder when it comes to LED projects gives you so much more freedom in creating anything you can think of, because you no longer have to rely on finding that perfect solder-free connector that may not even exist for what you need it to do. So I'm going to take the first LED strip that I prepped with the long wire soldered on and put that in my far right channel and work my way up towards the top, where I'll be cutting off any extra lights that I don't need. Then I'll take a second strip I made and do the same thing on the channel right next to it. And here's a closer shot of what I'm doing, and hopefully you can see that the LED profiles are positioned so that the light will be washing the wall with color versus pointed directly out. Next, I went to the left side and did another 2 strips in those 2 channels, just like the right side. For the profiles on the baseboard, this will be my 5th LED strip, where I'm starting in the middle and working my way left. As I get to the first turn, you might be wondering how I'll make that 90-degree angle. For this, I'll be using the controversial bend method, and if you're curious what that is, here's what I'm talking about. Now, in my old gaming room, I did 9 different bends this way, and in the 2 years before moving, I had 0 issues, so that's why I'm confident in doing it this way. I'll finish up with that side, going to the end and cutting off any remaining lights. And finally, using one last strip, I'll do the same thing on the right side of the room's baseboard. Next on the list, snap in all the milky white diffuser covers to the aluminum channels. Go ahead and do this for all the profiles on the wall and along the baseboards. Now, one piece of advice: whenever you're working with a lot of wires on LED strips, to keep everything better organized, I tape each group of the 3 wires from the LED strips together and give it a number. This will make it a lot easier when it comes to getting them connected to the controller. Moving on, I'll be using one of my favorite WLED plug-and-play controllers from Glidopto. This has everything I could want, including 4 data outputs, a mic, and a built-in 15 amp fuse, among other things. Getting this connected to your LEDs is super easy. Here's your voltage and here's your ground slot, but since we want to take advantage of all 4 data outputs, they include beefy, what looks like 16 gauge red and black wires. Go ahead and connect the red to the voltage opening and then the black to the ground. They also include these Wago connectors, which splits the data and ground. Connect one to the red and the other to the black. Now, to make this as easy to understand, let's pretend at the end of each of these 4 groups of wires is where I have one of my SK6812 strips connected. And when I soldered the wires to the strips, the red was always connected to the LED strip's voltage pad, the green was to the middle data, and my white was to the ground. So all I have to do is connect each of my green data lines coming from the LED strip to one of the 4 data openings on the Glidopto controller like I'm doing here. And it doesn't even matter what order they're connected in, since you can change that all in the WLED software. Then you can open up the slots in the Wago connectors, and this is pretty self-explanatory. All my red voltage wires from each LED strip will go into one of the openings that's connected to the voltage Wago, and again, it makes 0 difference which slot you choose. Then all my white ground wires from the LED strip go into the Wago that's connected to the ground on the controller. For power, I'm going to use this high quality 12 volt 12 amp unit. I'll then take 2 3-slot Wagos and connect one to the voltage and one to the negative wire on the supply. Next, I'll take some thick 16 gauge red and black wires and cut 2 small strips out of each. After stripping all those back, I'll insert the 2 red into the Wago connected to the power and then the 2 black into the other Wago. And all this is doing is splitting the voltage and ground so that we can power 2 controllers with the one supply versus having to use 2 separate ones. So this is the black version of the controller I just showed you that has the 4 data outputs. And this is the controller where the 4 vertical LED strips in my wall will eventually get plugged into. Now this side over here is where you plug your power into. It has a spot for a barrel connector or bare wires. I'll be using the bare wires and inserting one of the 2 red wires and one of the 2 black wires into the openings. Then for the remaining 2 strips I have on the baseboard, I'll be using Glidopto's new high-end model, the Elite. This has about everything you could want, including Ethernet for those who want a hardwired connection. And for this, I'll use the remaining red and black wire that we split from our power to connect to the controller just like we did on the first one. Next, I'll bring everything over to the cabinet to begin connecting the lights to the controller. And another benefit of this cabinet is they give you a ton of space in the back for all your power strips and HDMI cords that you'll be concealing. Right here I'm attaching my 2 LED runs on the baseboards into the Elite controller, and then the 4 vertical strips to the Glidopto's 4-channel controller that I already showed you how to get connected. And because I had everything separated and numbered, even though this looks like a plate of spaghetti, it's all completely organized and was a breeze to connect. Now as far as the WLED settings, for the 4 vertical lights I have on the wall, I have the brightness limiter turned on and set to 2000 milliamps, and this should be plenty of power to get the brightness I want. I'm using SK6812 LEDs, so make sure to have that selected for strip type, color order is GRB, swap set to none, and then I have 120 LEDs connected to GPIO 16. You do the same thing for as many GPIO outlets that you're using, and you would simply input the number of LEDs for each. And since each of my 4 vertical channels has 120 LEDs, that's what I'll put in the length for every output. For my 2 baseboard lights, everything else is the same as before, except that the LED strip going left has 280 lights connected to GPIO 16, and then the strip going right has 269 LEDs connected to GPIO 2. Now, if everything I just said made absolutely no sense, I'll leave a link to a video I already made that walks you through every easy step in great detail on how to connect, set up, and control LED lights using Glidopto's controllers. So this is where the fun really starts. I'm going to take my front left speaker with the power cord attached and remount it on the black bracket. Now what you probably already realize is that space between the 2 LED channels that are on the wall act as a perfect spot to run our power cable down to the floor, and you'll see here shortly what I'll be doing to close it up. But first, at the bottom, I'm using some cable concealer tracks to tidy up the wires from the speakers and the LED lights. Then I'll be doing the exact same thing on the right side. Next, I'll be attaching some double-sided sticky tape to all the vertical profiles on the wall. I have used this for many projects and it works amazing and it's super strong. And because it's so thin, it makes anything you attach to it look like one solid piece. I then measured the distance from the top of the speaker to the ceiling, and after a trip to my local hardware store, I found the perfect molding trim piece that I cut down to size that should work perfect. I went ahead and lined everything up and attached it to the profiles. And this will be doing a couple things. A, it covers up the aluminum frame, making it blend in and look like an architectural part of the wall, and B, for under the speaker where I have the wire, it'll allow me to hide that from sight, creating a super clean end result with 0 visible cables. I moved on to do the same thing on the left side, and so far I must admit I'm loving how this idea is coming together. So moving back to the projector, if you want to use the 3500 Pro as the center channel, here's how you do that. Plug in the wireless receiver into the eARC HDMI port and then connect the USB to power the device. Next, plug in the aux side of the AV cables that the projector comes with into the aux port on the back. Then take the AV cables that the speaker system comes with and go red to red and white to white, and then the green aux side goes into the receiver. And guys, remember, zip ties are your friend when it comes to cable management. Now, like I said earlier, this comes with a Fire TV stick, and they even have a hidden HDMI port USB area to plug it in. But considering I have multiple HDMI devices I'm wanting to connect to the 3500 Pro, I'll be going a completely different route. Enter the fancy LED's HDMI 2.1 sync box, and I have used this in a lot of my other setups primarily for the screen mirroring functionality, but today the fact that I can plug in up to 3 HDMI devices and use this as a switch will be exactly what I need. So let's go over how this plays out. I'll have the fancy LED sync box on the left, then my Nvidia Shield, followed by my GMK Tech Mini PC, and finally my Sony 4K UHD Blu-ray player. Now all I have to do is connect an HDMI cable from all 3 of these devices back to one of the 3 HDMI openings on the fancy LED's box. And because their box supports 4K HDR pass-through, including Dolby Vision and gaming at up to 144 Hz, you're not sacrificing picture quality or performance by doing it this way. Then one last HDMI cable will go from the sync box back to the projector, and it's as simple as that. Next, I can move the subs back into their place and get them pushed up against the wall, and this is going to hide the power cord coming down from the wall speakers, plus cover up the LED wires as well. And finally, I'll put the screen back in, and then push the cabinets as close to the wall as possible, and then I'll use some shims to raise up the center part of the media console to get it as level as possible with the others. I'll put the projector in the cabinet and then get the surround sound wireless receiver reconnected, connect my one HDMI cable from the fancy LED sync box, and finally the power. Once that's all done, I'll push the button on the cabinet controller and everything will automatically close up. Moving on, let's turn our attention to the cabinet where I have all my devices connected. And as you can see, when you combine the HDMI cables with the power cords, it's kind of a mess to look at. And I realize a lot of people could care less, but I had an idea how to clean this up. First, I took every HDMI cable and power cord and wrapped it in some white Alex Tech cable mesh sleeves, and I've used these in a ton of other projects, and they definitely help create a much cleaner install. Next, I went to my hardware store and got a long piece of staircase trim and cut that down to the size of the cabinet. I then brought out my router table and used a drill bit to notch out a bunch of half circles along the bottom of the board. Now, hindsight's 20/20, but if you end up doing this, use a slightly larger bit since these ended up being a little bit too small, which you'll see here shortly. So here's what it now looks like with the trim piece inserted. I'm running all my wires through the notches from the router bit, and it hides all the ugly cords behind. And if I did make the notches a little bit larger, the board would sit more flush with the bottom. And I ended up doing the same thing on the other side to hide the cords from my wireless router and PS5. Now really the toughest decision I had when making this video was what furniture to go with. I wanted something light that the kids could move around on their own, large enough to where we could all sit and enjoy a movie, but yet small enough where the area still felt open. Because my entire goal of this project is to have the basement still feel like one big area the kids can run around and play in, but in 30 seconds, have it transform into an epic family movie space. So I ended up going with a couple of these oversized chairs that I'm hoping will check all the boxes. And after I'd set them up, I also added some furniture sliders to the bottom so that my kids will be able to move them around without my help and without destroying the carpet. Well, my idea is finally starting to come together. The space still looks and feels like a play area. They now have some nice comfy chairs to relax and read books on, and we didn't have to get rid of anything. And in case you're wondering, we purposely don't want anything on the walls and we don't want shelves down here because that stuff doesn't hold up well when they're down here with their friends playing soccer. But when we want to watch a movie, we can now simply slide the chairs out, move them together, get the popcorn, and we're ready to go. Now there is going to be one area of compromise, and that's with the rear surround sound speakers. I'd love to hear any creative mounting ideas y'all might have that would keep them safe and out of the way when not being used, but for now, if we want to watch a movie, I plan on taking the extra 30 seconds to bring them out of the closet and set them up. So the idea is simple enough. I want to create the best Ambilight setup that anyone has ever seen, and create the ultimate step-by-step guide that anyone can easily follow. Now, even though you could do exactly what I'm about to do on any size TV or around a monitor like I have in my gaming room, I wanted an extra challenge, so I'll be using my 120-inch projector to make things interesting. And the second part of this will be going over how to set everything up using a new tool called Soft Ambience, which absolutely blew me away and will for sure be the highlight of this video. Getting started, the first thing I had to do is to measure and map out how big the screen is when it's up and in position, and it's important to get this part right even if it means measuring multiple times. Next, I went to my local hardware store and picked up a 1x4 by 8 foot long piece of wood, as well as a 1x2 by 8, and after drilling some pilot holes, I screwed them together like I'm doing here. Then, after finding some studs, I attached this to the wall using some 2.5-inch deck screws. This isn't going to be supporting much weight, so I'm only drilling 2 holes into the wall. Now some compromises will have to be made in order for this to work, with the main one being I have to move the console unit away from the wall by about 3 inches, which you'll see why I have to do that here shortly. Moving on, I'll be using some more of the same pieces of wood that I used on top, but this one will be for the side. And after I have it put together, I'll screw it into the horizontal section already up, use a level to make sure it's straight, and then just one more screw at the bottom to make sure it stays put. And this step is the reason I had to slightly move things away from the wall. Once this is done, I'll do the same thing for the other side. I'll move the camera in closer so you can get a better look at what I've done so far, and I think it's safe to say that no one will ever be hiring me for my carpenter skills. Next, I picked up a couple 1x4 by 8 foot long white trim pieces, and these will get screwed into the boards that we just put up like I'm doing here. And I also cut the top ends of these at 45 degrees, which will make the end result look more like a picture frame. Then I bought a 1x4 by 12 foot long section of the same white trim piece, cut that down to size, and screwed that into the top. Now for LEDs, I'll be using some 12 volt individually adjustable SK6812 strips. These have been my go-to lights now for a while on all my DIY projects, and they've been awesome to work with. The first thing I'll be doing is cutting off the beginning connectors. Then I'll be using some 18 gauge silicone wires and cutting 3 sections each about 8 feet long. And I'll speed through this next part since I've already made a couple how-to solder videos that I'll link in the description that you can check out. Those videos have close-up footage with detailed commentary and break down really the only 2 things you'll ever need to do when it comes to LED projects. The first of which is connecting wires to the pads like I just did. The other is connecting 2 strips together, and since I know I'll need more than 5 meters for the backlighting, I'll cut off the end of the strip we just worked on and the beginning of a new 5-meter roll. Then it's as simple as sticking the 2 pads as close together as possible and then applying some solder to the joints. And I'll make sure to leave a link in the description to this Kester solder I'm using, which came highly recommended, and it's for sure the best I've ever used. Once this is done, I'll take it over to the setup and begin sticking the LED strips to the back of the trim pieces that we just installed so that the LEDs are facing towards the wall. And if you're paying attention, this step is equivalent to attaching our lights to the back of a TV in a traditional setup. Now, once I get to the corner, I found these 90-degree plastic turn sections on Amazon, which are pretty much the same thing that fancy LEDs use. And this will help us make that turn without having to do any more cuts or soldering. From here, I'll continue along making my way around the entire perimeter until I get to the end of our panel, and then I'll simply cut off the extra LEDs. Now I have no idea if power injection will be required at the end here, but just in case it is, I'll take out the solder kit and quickly attach a voltage and ground wire to the end to make it easy to add if needed once I get everything connected. Next on the agenda is to go over everything that I now have set up in this room from an LED and wiring standpoint. And this is probably the most intimidating aspect of the project for a beginner, but I promise I'll lay everything out so that you realize how simple it actually is. Now I already have a bunch of LED strips in place from the build video I made of this area that you can check out, but to make things super easy to follow along, here I have LED strip 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. 1, 2, 3, and 4 are attached to the LED strips that are mounted on the wall going vertical. 5 is going to the strip along the baseboard going left, 6 is for the baseboard going right, and this one right here is 7, which we just did, and that's the one going around the perimeter of the frame. And then these wires right here are the ones I just soldered on to the end in case we need to do any power injection. And all the numbers that I just shared is exactly what I have written on the blue tape attached to each run to help me keep everything straight. So for controlling all the lights, I'll be using Glidopto's 4D Elite controller that comes pre-installed with WLED. This is currently their flagship model, and I've used this in a ton of my projects and I've had 0 issues. This particular model has 4 data outputs, which will be perfect for this install, and it supports an Ethernet connection, which I'll be going over here in a bit. Now for this example, I'll be showing you how easy it is to connect LED strip 1, 2, 3, and 4 to the Glidopto controller. The first thing I'll do is open up the voltage lever on the right side, and for anyone that hasn't used this controller yet, just a heads up, this is not open. It might feel like it's open because there's some resistance, but you have to keep pushing until it's almost upright like it is here. Next, take the included red, what looks like either a 16 or 14 gauge wire, and connect it to the voltage slot that we just opened, and then do the same for the black negative right below. They also include 2 Wago style clips that you'll open up and connect to both the red and black wire that we just attached. From here, I'll open up all 4 data slots, then all 4 openings on both of the Wago connectors. So to make this super easy to follow along, we'll pretend that these wires over here labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4 are the same wires I have laid out on the floor, and green will always represent data, red will be voltage, and white will be ground. I'll first take the green data line from LED strip 1 and connect that to data slot 16, also known as GPIO 16. Then I'll move on to strip number 2 and connect that to the next data slot, and I'll do the same with 3 and 4. From here, I'll take the red wire from the first strip and plug that into the Wago connected to the voltage, and then take my white wire and that will go into the Wago connected to our negative. I'll then do the same with the other 3 strips, but it's important to note that it makes no difference whatsoever what order you connect the red wires to the top Wago, and it makes no difference whatsoever the white wires are connected to the bottom one. And I'll try separating everything a bit better so it's easier to grasp what we just did, but hopefully it was easy enough to follow along. Now for powering these lights, I'll use this 12 volt, 12.5 amp supply. The wires do come pre-stripped like you're seeing here, but I'm going to cut them back just a little bit more. These will then go into the left side of the controller, red into the voltage, and black into the negative. So let's now talk about performance, and for any type of LED project where you want the absolute best results, and especially if you're in an area of your house that might not have the best Wi-Fi signal, having a direct Ethernet option is a huge plus. I have a bunch of these TP-Link mesh pods all over, which makes it incredibly easy to give your Glidopto controllers a more stable connection. So if you ever experience any lag or choppiness in your LEDs using Wi-Fi, I highly recommend giving this setup a try to see if it helps. And I also want to call out how simple it is to set this up when connected to Ethernet. Open up the WLED app, click the plus icon, discover lights, then the checkbox, scroll down, and your device is already added. Or if you're using the new app in the Play Store, open up the program, scroll down, and it will automatically appear. Next, I'll show you how I have everything configured in WLED. Go into the controller, click Config, and then LED Preferences. And if you remember, we're currently setting up these 4 LED strips, and I already know from counting that each run going up has 120 LEDs. I'm going to enable my brightness limiter and set it to 7000 milliamps, which is 7 amps, and that's more than enough juice for the lights I currently have. And guys, remember, this is meant to be an Ambilight setup. I'm not trying to blind anyone, so I definitely don't need to run these at max power. Further down, this controller comes preset with GPIO 16, 12, 4, and 2 already added, so all we have to do is change the strip type for each to SK6812 and then enter the number of LEDs connected to each of the data lines. And this one's super easy because each strip has exactly 120. Go ahead and hit save, and just like that, you're all set. Now, if you don't want to go the Ethernet route, getting these set up to your home network is very simple. Go to your Wi-Fi and connect to the WLED-AP network and enter in WLED1234, all lowercase if it asks for a password. This screen should then automatically come up and click Wi-Fi settings. Go ahead and scan and connect to your home network, enter in your password, and hit save. Reconnect to your home network and then download and open up the WLED app. Hit the plus icon top right and scan for devices, then the check mark, and you should see your new WLED device. So we just went over getting 1, 2, 3, and 4 set up, and now it's time to move on to 5, 6, and 7, which will be very similar to what we just did. I'll use another Glidopto 4D Elite controller, but on this one, for right now, we'll only be using the 3 data outputs. I'll use another 12 volt, 12.5 amp power supply, and again, this will also get connected via Ethernet. Then for configuring this one, I'll again turn the brightness limiter on and set it to 7000 milliamps. Change everything to SK6812 like before, but for LED strip 5 that goes left along the baseboard, and what we have connected to GPIO 16, there's 280 LEDs, so that's what I'll put in the length field. For LED strip 6 that's connected to GPIO 12, which goes right along the baseboard, that has 269. And finally for 7, that goes around the perimeter of the frame that we just built that's connected to GPIO 4, the total number of LEDs for this run is 378. Hit save and we officially have all of our lights set up in WLED. I'll also mention that the power injection wires that I soldered onto the end turned out not to be necessary, so I won't be doing anything with those, but if it was needed, I could simply connect that red and white wire back to the last opening on the Wagos connected to the Glidopto controller that the strip is plugged into like I'm doing here. Now before putting the cabinets back in place, I'll be using some wood boards to create a base, and I'd recommend doing this if you have carpet like I do. This is because the center cabinet with all the electrical components weighs a lot more than the outer cubbies, and the wood will ensure that everything sits even. So the last thing to do as far as LED lights is to add one more run underneath the cabinets. Here I soldered my own wires to some more 12 volt SK6812 LEDs that I'll stick underneath the overhang. Because with a traditional TV Ambilight setup, you would have lights matching the bottom part of the screen, but with a roll-up projector, that's obviously not possible. And I'm hoping by adding lights here that I'll still get that full immersion that I'm wanting. And for this run, I ended up using a third Glidopto controller with a 12 volt 3 amp power supply that I set up the same way as the others, with this strip having 176 LEDs. Alright, so it's officially the moment of truth. I put the screen back in place and opened it up, and just like I was hoping, the frame that we built behind it with the LEDs is completely out of sight, but at the same time it's extremely close to the edge, which will hopefully give us the same type of ambient backlighting that you'd find on a TV. And I will mention, if you had a fixed screen instead and wanted to backlight it, I'd probably try using this exact same approach of building a frame and mounting the screen to that in order to get it off the wall and provide space for the LEDs. So let's now move on to part 2, which is where all the magic happens. And Signal RGB has been around for a while, but there's a new feature within the program called Soft Ambience, which is bar none the best screen mirroring software I've ever used. And a huge shout out to Mr. Doctor for creating this incredible utility that's an absolute masterpiece. So after installing Signal RGB and downloading Soft Ambience, on the left side of the program, click on Devices. Here you'll see a bunch of popular products that are supported, but for this tutorial, we want to click on WLED. It'll automatically display all your WLED devices that you have set up, but if you don't see it, you can always enter in the IP address and search for it that way. Once you find the controller, click Link, and now Signal RGB is able to take control and the fun can officially begin. So the controller I just connected is the one that we set up 5, 6, and 7 on. Back at Signal RGB, now that we're linked, click the back button and then into the device we just connected. And because Signal RGB is able to communicate with WLED, it already recognizes that there's a total of 927 LEDs connected to this controller, and it's our job to break those lights into groups that we can work with. Strip 5 is what we connected first, and I'm going to break this into 2 parts. Part 1 on the back wall going left has 121 LEDs, and then I'll do part 2 going out, which has 159. So in Signal RGB, I hit the plus icon, click Create Custom Strip, put in 121, and create. I'll hit the plus icon again, click Create Custom Strip, and this time put in 159. Next is Strip 6, and this again has 121 going right, and then only 148 going out. So this means I'll create another segment that has 121, and another that has 148. Now what I absolutely love about this program is how you can pretty much do whatever you want to get the effect you're going for. And for right now, I actually don't want to use any of these lights, which I'll explain why later on. And all I have to do for this is click into each segment, turn the brightness to 0, and all of run 5 and 6 for now will be turned off. Moving on, this brings us to the LEDs that are behind the screen. And since I did run the lights further down than what will be displayed on the screen, I'll be creating a segment for this portion, which ended up being 20, and I'll turn those off as well. My next segment will be the remaining lights going up the right side, which is 90. Then going across the top is 158. Going back down the left side is again 90, and then the last 20 that'll also turn off. And when you're looking at this screen, it might seem like a lot, but I'll switch back to our room and put up all the numbers that we just went over so you can get a visual for all the segments that we just created. Next, make sure you download and you're running the Soft Ambience program in Signal RGB, click on Lighting, then go into Layouts. Here's where we can take the segments we just created and position them to the precise location that we want them to mirror on the screen. And since I'm not doing anything with the first 5 segments for now, I'll skip those and start with the custom strip 90, which are the LEDs going up the right side of the screen. Here you'll see a strip that represents those 90 LEDs that I can make bigger or smaller, rotate in any direction, and move around to wherever I want. And for this one, I'll move it to the right of the screen and expand it to go from top to bottom. Then I'll go to the segment on top that has 158 lights, and again rotate and move to the spot I want. And finally the left side, which has another 90 LEDs, and I'll move those into position. Next, I'll go back to Devices and link to the controller I have connected to the LEDs under the cabinet. And again with this one, since I want the lights to perfectly line up with the width of the screen, I'll be creating 3 segments, 8, 160, and 8. And just like before, I'll go in and turn both the outer parts of this run off, so we'll only be mapping out the middle section. Then moving back to layouts, we now have the new segments we just created, where I'll be pulling up the 160 run and positioning that to the bottom part of the screen. The last thing we need to set up are the 4 vertical pillars on my wall, and if you remember, each of these have 120 LEDs, but since the height of the screen is smaller than the height of each length, I'll be splitting each of these into 3 segments. 17 LEDs below the bottom of the screen, 92 LEDs will match the height, and then there's 11 LEDs above. When setting this up, since we have the 4 separate runs, I have to do the 17, 92, and 11 configuration 4 times to get the total number of LEDs we have connected, which is 480. And then all the segments with 17 and 11 will be turned off. Then back in layouts, it's now just a matter of lining up those 4 strips that we set to 92 to their corresponding locations. So I purposely wanted to keep what I'm doing in the software program full screen in order for all of you to clearly see what I'm doing and hopefully get a good idea of how easy it is. But I also wanted to show you in real time how this plays out. I'll go ahead and make the software screen smaller and speed through what I just did. This time we're able to see how everything falls into place. So once you have it all mapped out, go ahead and enjoy the fruits of your labor by taking an image and just moving it around like I'm doing here. And what signal RGB is doing in real time is capturing whatever you have on the screen and sending that color data to our WLED controllers. And I guarantee you'll be absolutely mesmerized by how fluid, quick, and accurate the image on the screen is moving seamlessly between every single LED that we have set up. Now, I've done a ton of videos on different LED projects, but without a doubt, this type of setup 100% gets the biggest wow factor when I have friends or family over, because it's something that the vast majority of people have never seen or even knew existed. Now, I know I've covered a lot of information, but it's time to actually go over why this program is in a league of its own. The first of many things that blew my mind was how insanely accurate this was down to the last detail. When I play this scene, I want you to pay close attention right here where Bingo walks in. Then I want you to pay attention to this area when she walks across the floor and how the subtle shadow is picked up by the LEDs underneath the cabinet. And then again when Bingo exits the scene on the right side.
And if one of these bottles should happen to fall, they'll be thanks.
And I have so many incredible examples of just how dialed in you can get this that not Govee, not Philips Hue, not Nanoleaf, and not even fancy LEDs can match. And part of the reason is I have complete control on mapping out every LED to the location I want. And part of it's that I'm able to use individually addressable LEDs, meaning every single LED is able to be controlled, whereas plug and play options are at best able to be controlled in groups of 3. So when it comes to ambient lighting, everyone is going to have different opinions on what they think looks best. And what makes this software so special is that it lets you customize pretty much every aspect that you could possibly want to your specific liking. For example, you can turn the gamma up, which increases the contrast so that darker areas of content goes black and the LEDs will only be turned on at the brightest parts of the screen. Turning it down will do the exact opposite, blowing out the darker areas to eliminate any black spots. But overall, my personal preference is to keep this somewhere between 10 to 15. Saturation will give you the ability to adjust the intensity of the color. The higher the value, the more bold the colors will look, and turning it down will make the colors more washed out. Again, this boils down to what you think looks best, but I generally kept this value around 20. You can also change the color temperature from warm to cool, and after playing around with both options, I thought having it set to cool gave it a much more realistic look, so I recommend keeping this between 40 and 50. And hue shift will let you adjust the actual color, but for this, I just kept it at 0. So I know there's a lot of people out there that prefer a more subtle and gradient effect for backlighting, and this is where things start to get interesting with filters. From the drop down you have 5 options: None, Blur, Gaussian Blur, Sharpness, and Sobel. For this example we want to select Blur, and then you can adjust the intensity of that filter. And what this does is it blends the colors on the screen together so you get more of a soft ambient effect that's less distracting for certain types of content. And for you to get a better feel on how this affects the overall look, I recorded the same thing 4 different times all in one take so you can get a pretty good idea on whether this blur filter is something that you like. Now I know for a fact many people are going to think the 100% blur effect looks best, but for me, I personally like how things look at 25%. Because here you still get some incredible accuracy, but the movement of the lights are a little more fluid compared to how things look at 0%. I'll play through some more of these side-by-side comparisons before moving on, but I do recommend hitting pause every once in a while to get a still frame of the differences between each setting. So another awesome filter that you'll definitely want to play around with is sharpness. This further enhances the image so that every single little detail is picked up. Now, considering the default no filter is already super accurate, there isn't going to be a night and day difference, but if you're like me and want to see what this program's really capable of, definitely try this one out. Moving on, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the vertical side lights because even though I love how they look, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that think it's too much. However, I will keep the lights under the console unit turned on in order to get the full coverage, but you certainly could turn those off as well. And here I'll do no filter, 100% sharpness, 100% blur, and then 100% Gaussian blur. And Gaussian blur, from what I can tell, has just a little bit more gradient mixing than regular blur, but overall they do look pretty similar. Now, at least for behind the screen, because there's about 4 inches of space between the wall and the lights, which softens the effect, if I had just the backlighting, I would run 100% sharpness for this scenario since that's what I think looks best. And then the last filter, Sobel, which really wasn't my style. This one highlights the lines within the image and creates some very neon looking color schemes. Check it out if you want, but I never spent much time playing around with this one. Next, another great feature of soft ambience is their automatic black bar adjustment. Here on the screen I have Wild Robot, and all I have to do is hit the auto crop horizontal bars, and just like that, my top and bottom LEDs are now engaged. And you also have a manual slider that you can adjust to do the same thing. But if you didn't want to crop the image, you could always just map the LEDs to where the picture is, save that as a custom layout, and instantly load it up for this type of content.
How do I get to eat swim fly?
I thought you'd never ask. Me as the teacher who could still do it. You as the student who could do it.
Now I did save what might be the coolest thing for last. The smooth motion slider at the top I have set to 0, and this is where the LEDs will be transitioning with the colors and movement on the screen as fast as possible. Bump this up to 100, and this creates a very slow fade out when there's motion like you're seeing here. So play around with this to see what you think looks best, but for this entire video I've had this set to right around 15, which I think is about perfect, because you get this very subtle trail that will make transitions from one scene to the next less abrupt. So here I want to go back to the beginning to the lights I turned off that are on my baseboard, and when I was installing them I never really thought it through that there really isn't a quote-unquote best location for these to get mapped, since this enters us into a 3D plane when the screen is a flat 2D surface. Now I'm not even going to bother with the LEDs on the baseboard behind the media console, but these LEDs on the left and right, I'll first go into the devices where we segmented them out and turn them back on. Then in layouts, I'll first try mapping the left side to the bottom part of the screen and then the right side to the right side of the screen. And again, there's really no perfect spot to put these, but we'll try this first. And here I actually thought it looked pretty cool, but I did go in and tweak one thing. The left LEDs I'm going to remap out to only the bottom left half of the screen and try it again. So if you are like me and want to go crazy with an Ambilight setup, just keep this in mind that depending on where you're installing the LEDs, you might run into the same dilemma of where to best map them out if you install any of them perpendicular to the screen. So I've talked a lot about the features, but how does it all come together? Well, once you have it dialed into your liking, the performance is nothing short of amazing. Here you can really start to get a feel for just how fluid the lights are and how perfectly in sync they are with the content on the screen. And I'm sure you've already noticed, but you can see hotspots reflecting off the media console on the bottom. I purposely left it like this for the video so you can see how every LED is able to be controlled by the program, but I would recommend using the same Musada diffuser channels that I use for the vertical pillars on the wall to get rid of these hotspots. Next, I have to call out what might be the most impressive part of everything, which is how instantaneous the transitions are from one scene to the next. Here I'll play a short clip that's completely unedited so you can see for yourself. And this type of speed is absolutely insane, but it's made possible because of the Ethernet connection that I went over earlier on in the video. So take a little time to watch this clip and truly appreciate the performance. Now, one thing I did want to highlight is if you're trying to use this Ambilight technology on movies or shows from major streaming services like Disney or Netflix, all those providers are able to block screen capture programs from running to help prevent piracy. Here, when I have a movie pulled up from Disney+, Signal RGB isn't able to see what's on the screen. So to fix this, go into your browser, go to Settings, System, and turn off Graphics Accelerator, and just like that, Signal RGB is now able to see the screen. So switching over to hardware, and the good news is if you already own a mini PC, a laptop, or a PC, the cost to do what I just did, which is obviously probably more extreme than what 99% of anyone else would ever try doing, is very inexpensive, and I'll leave links to everything I used in the description. And at the time of making this video, Soft Ambience is currently free, but if they ever decide to charge for it, I promise you I'll be their first customer. Now to wrap things up, this definitely was one of my longest videos in both length and in time it took to film and edit, but I hope you enjoyed seeing the entire detailed process come together. And I also made a playlist of all my favorite videos that are fun to test things out with that I'll leave a link to in the description. From here on out, I'll play some of my favorite examples of everything in action. Thank you all for watching, and as always, I hope you have a blessed day. So in today's video, I'm going to show you just how easy it is to create a true custom Ambilight setup and why fancy LEDs is better at this than any other plug-and-play type solution currently on the market. Now this is the room that I'll be building out, and because I need a much larger space for the TV compared to where the previous owners had theirs mounted, I'll be flipping everything around and getting rid of the mount they had back here. The next order of business is to give everything a nice fresh coat of white paint. And in case you're wondering why white, LEDs look much better, brighter, and accurate when reflecting off lighter surfaces compared to darker colors. So if you're trying to create the best looking Ambilight setup, always opt for white or something close to it. Next, I always recommend coming up with a game plan, and that usually always means measuring the entire space and then mapping out that area on a piece of paper. And for this particular build, I want the TV to be mounted exactly in the middle of this big wall right here. Another thing I always do before drilling into the wall is to make an outline with painter's tape of the TV. This will let me better visualize what it'll look like to make sure I like the placement. Next, I quickly use my scanner to mark out where the studs are, and thankfully they're in a good spot where I won't have to worry about using some big drywall anchors. Now in the past, I've 100% made the mistake of attaching this mount to the wall first, then realizing when I hang the TV it's nowhere close to where I wanted it. That's because the brackets will rarely ever be holding up the TV at the exact center, so this is where you want to first attach things like I have here, and then measure down from the top of the TV to where it'll be screwed into the wall. This will give you the actual location of where you want to get things installed so that your TV ends up where it's supposed to be. And in case you're wondering, this mounts from a company called Echo Gear. It has a 4.8 rating on Amazon with over 2,000 reviews, and as always, I'll leave links to everything in the description in case you're interested. So if all your measurements were correct, when you go to hang the screen, it should be very close to the spot you have marked out, and in this case, it turned out about perfect. Now moving on to the brains of the operation, we have Fancy LED's HDMI 2.1 sync box, and they just released a new software update for this that I'll go over later on. In this kit, you get the HDMI sync box that you plug into your TV, and then this supports up to 3 different HDMI devices, such as a PlayStation, Apple TV, computer, Chromecast, or any other HDMI device out there. Then you have the LEDs. These are high-quality WS2814 strips that have 96 LEDs per meter and a dedicated white diode, plus they can be cut down to size to get complete coverage around the back of your TV. You also have a user manual, a high-speed HDMI cable, some corner clips to help with mounting, and your power adapter with different plugs to fit your region. To begin, I'll first stick the 4 corner pieces around the TV, and as you're doing this, keep in mind that you want the LED strip to be about 1/2 inch from the edges for best results. So the TV I'm using is a 65-inch Sony Bravia 8, and as far as installing the LED strip, you can either start bottom left or bottom right and then work your way up and around. I'll start bottom right and go up, trying to make sure that they're installed as straight as possible. And as you come to the first turn, you can see we're able to use the corner clips as a guide to make the turn like I'm doing here. And this is one of the many areas I talked about when I recently did a comparison between Fancy LEDs and Govi's AI sync box that you can take a look at. But because Fancy LEDs wisely went the cuttable route, you get complete corner coverage, whereas Govi will have dark spots because they went with preset lengths that have to fit multiple size TVs. Now that I worked my way all around and I'm back at the beginning, I can simply trim off the extra LEDs and we can move on to the next step. So to truly create custom Ambilight setups, you need products that can actually be customized, and this is where things get interesting. This LED strip that they sell that can be placed anywhere and syncs with the colors on the screen offers the same 96 LED per meter density as the one behind the TV, the same dedicated white diodes, and with cut points at just over every inch as well as the accessible copper pads, my gut tells me I should be able to do pretty much whatever I want with these, and I'm going to be putting that theory to the test. Now to further highlight why this is the best for custom installs, let's do a quick comparison with the best strip Govi offers, which is their Pro 2 model. First off, this strip has 60 LEDs per meter compared to Fancy, which has 96. Govi is able to control the lights in groups of 6, where Fancy is in groups of 3. They have cut points at every 4 inches instead of every 1. And the biggest difference is that you have solder points at every 1 inch with Fancy, while Govi has them at every 20 inches. So while this light strip from Govi is actually a great product, if you're wanting to do custom installs, it doesn't take a genius to realize which one of these will give you the most flexibility. The first thing I'll be doing is screwing in a couple of 1x2x8 pieces of wood into my wall. I got these at my local hardware store for about $8 each, and since these aren't going to be holding much weight when it's all said and done, I'm not worried about finding studs or using drywall anchors. Now if you are curious on how I'm attaching these, I'm first using a drill bit to make a pilot hole, then I'll take a Forstner bit that'll allow me to sink the screw below the surface for a flush finish. Next, I'll use some very sticky double-sided tape and put this on all 4 edges of the wood that we just attached to the wall. I've probably used this stuff now on at least 15 different projects and it's never failed me yet. From here, I'll be using one of my favorite spotless diffuser channels from Muzada. This is their U108 model, which I've also used many times before. So these are going to get attached to all 4 sides of the wood with the sticky tape that we just stuck on in the last step. And because these aren't very heavy, the tape alone should have no problem holding these up. As far as the space at the bottom where the 2 meters didn't extend to, I cut 4 small sections of the profiles to fill the gap, so I'll eventually have ceiling to baseboard lighting. Now this brings us to our first test. I want to have lighting on each of these 4 channels we just installed, and each section is a little over 7 feet. Above and beyond it simply being expensive to buy 4 LED strips from Fancy LEDs to complete this, the thought of having to plug in 4 power supplies really made me want to find a different solution, so here's what I came up with. I first carefully cut back the heat shrink tubing from the beginning of the strip where the USB cable is attached because I wanted to make sure that these really are normal WS2814 strips and they don't include any proprietary connections or cables like many other companies try doing. And thankfully, this has just our standard voltage, data, and ground wires that we all know and love and are incredibly easy to work with. I went ahead and used a soldering iron to heat up the connection points to remove the cables that these come with, but make sure to save this part because we're going to need it again later on. Then I took my own 18 gauge silicone wires and cut off more than I think I'll need, and began the easy process of attaching these to the beginning of the strip that we just worked on. And as always, I won't go into great detail of this easy process because I've already made a couple dedicated how-to solder videos that I'll link in the description that goes over everything I'm doing right now with close-up footage and detailed commentary that you can check out if interested. So the next order of business is to stick this modded LED strip in the first channel like I'm doing now and work my way up towards the ceiling. Once I get to the top, I can simply cut off the extra lights. Now I'm telling you, the best decision Fancy LEDs ever made was to use these DIY friendly strips, and I'm sure you probably already know what I'm going to do. Because each roll is 5 meters long, I should have enough to use the leftovers for the second section. All I have to do is connect some more wires to the strip where we made the cut, and then use this new section to again go up towards the ceiling. Once I get to the top, I'll cut off the extra, and I've now just about used the entire 5-meter roll for these 2 vertical beams. Let's now talk about how we're going to get these hooked up. So this little box is the brains behind this part of the operation, and we need to get it connected to the LED strips we just modded. Now my thought process was, if this one USB-C cable is enough to power the full 5-meter strip, then there's no reason why it can't handle powering and sending data to the 2 different sections we just made. After stripping back the voltage, ground, and data lines, I'll use some Waggle connectors to split everything. And by splitting the data, both of the LED strips we just attached to the wall should do the exact same thing at the exact same time, and that's what I want. And just an FYI, I ran out of 3-slot Waggles, which is why I have the 5-slot one here. Moving back to our lights, I'll take the controller we just set up, and all I have to do is connect the red voltage lines from both LED strips to the Waggle connected to our red voltage line on the controller. Then our 2 green data lines coming from the strips get attached to the data connector, and finally our 2 white ground wires to the Waggle coming from the black negative wire. I then did the exact same thing with another 5-meter roll of the lights for our other 2 vertical pillars here on the left. So I always recommend somehow marking each strip with something so you know which is which. This will make it easier when you're reconnecting everything together after cable management. And as far as tidying up the wires, I'll use some cable raceway tracks to get them out of sight and headed towards the power outlet. From here, I'll be snapping on the milky white diffuser covers that come with the aluminum profiles, and this will help create a smoother glow for when the LEDs are up and running. Then I'll finish up getting the covers attached to the 4 small sections on the bottom. Now because I want these profiles and the light source to be somewhat hidden from sight, I'm going to add some more of the same double-sided sticky tape to the front part of the wall contraption. I then went back to my hardware store and found some white trim molding pieces that'll work perfect to conceal everything. These are also not very heavy and should be fine staying put with just the sticky tape. So if anyone's not understanding what I just did, I put together a little model to hopefully help explain things better. Here I have the 1x2 inch piece of wood with my diffuser channels on either side, and this is what I screwed into the wall. Then I put my sticky tape on the front, and the beauty of this design is depending on if you want to actually see the diffused LED light source, or if you want to have it hidden from sight, either option will work just fine, and you would just use a bigger trim piece depending on the desired outcome. I'll now jump back to where these will get plugged in, and I'll go over what I like to do to make everything less of an eyesore. I'll screw in a little piece of leftover wood to the stud that's to the left of my electrical box. After plugging in the 2 power supplies that these strips come with, I'll make sure everything will fit in this decorative box that I'll set on the section that we just screwed in. And going back to making the wires longer than you think you'll need, some of mine were too short, so I extended them using some inline Waggles so that the controller and wires are all connected inside the box instead of trying to fit everything in the cable tracks on top of the baseboards. And you could use a variety of different tools, but I pulled out the table saw to make a small channel on the box so the track will fit and everything will be flush against the wall. So for most normal people, I'd for sure recommend just adding an outlet to where the TV's mounted. But for me, because I'm always trying out new ideas, I'm not sure if 1 month from now I'll be wanting to use this wall for something completely different. Because of this, I'll just keep it simple and run an extension cord up through the wall. However, I'm pretty sure it's against code to run a normal power cable behind the wall like I'm going to do, but in my 40 years on Earth, I've never had or know anyone that's ever had a cord spontaneously catch fire, so I'm not too worried. For pulling any wires through, I've always had good luck using the magnet pull. This is an extremely strong magnet that you can guide down to where you need it. I'll attach my extension cord to the lead and then fish it down to the opening where I'll then attach the cover just like I did up top. Next, I'm going to prep the back of my TV. Now, I like using some industrial strength Velcro to mount devices to the back like I'm doing here. I'll first get my fancy LED sync box attached and then connect this to the TV's main HDMI port. Then whatever streaming device or gaming console you're using can get plugged into any of the 3 available ports in the back of the sync box. I'll keep it simple for now and just use my NVIDIA Shield. Then the LEDs around the TV gets plugged directly into the USB-C port on the sync box like I'm doing here. And finally, I'll do some cable management on the power cord to bring it over to where the extension cord will be once the TV's hung. Moving on, I'll be adding some custom lights to both inside and underneath my media console. For this, we'll again get to see how DIY friendly fancy LEDs is. I'll take another strip and first cut 3 separate pieces, which will eventually go inside the cubbies. I'm also able to use more from that same strip and cut out another piece that'll go underneath. So after about 15 minutes of soldering, I was able to add some extension wires between the 3 pieces, as well as just like we did with our vertical bars, add our own wires to the beginning. Then I installed the first of our 3 sections in this cubby right here, before feeding the strip out the back and into cubby number 2, and then doing the same with our final space on the left. Now you obviously don't want wires hanging down, so I added some more small cable tracks to tidy everything up from one cabinet to the other. For the LED strip underneath, I'm able to stick that as well right to the surface of the media console that'll provide a nice glow when synced up. And just like I did with the vertical towers, I'll be splitting the voltage, ground, and data and connecting it to one controller so that both of these sections will be doing the same thing at the same time. So after getting the TV mounted, plugging in the power for our NVIDIA Shield, sync box, and TV, and moving the media console back, we're beginning to see things come together, but I have one more idea that I want to try out. Now for this area right here, instead of doing something similar to what we did on the left wall, I want to see how using Govi's Skyline hardware with fancy LED strip going in a vertical orientation will look. I absolutely love this design, and I have no idea why people are having such a hard time grasping how cool it is, because essentially it's no different than having a floor lamp if that floor lamp was able to stretch all the way up to your ceiling and provide a complete top to bottom wall washing effect, which of course floor lamps don't do since they are pretty short. And that's why the Skyline product is so cool, because it does exactly that. So right here, I just stuck the bottom piece to an old metal speaker stand I had laying around, which I think gives it a super clean look. Then I'll use another fancy LED strip and stick that to the Skyline frame that goes up to our ceiling, and then cut off any extra LEDs and run the wire that I have connected to the controller and power along the floor at the bottom of the baseboards. Now if you ask my kids, this is going to be their favorite part of the entire setup. If you remember, this is where the previous owners had the TV, but since I'm flipping the room, I thought it would be the perfect spot to turn into a popcorn and snack bar area for movie nights. I'm using some 2x4s to frame it in, and I even got to pull out my Craig pocket hole jig for this one. Next, I cut down to size some shelving board that I picked up at my local hardware store, and when I knew I had a good fit, I painted the 2x4 white to fit the room better. I drilled a hole in the countertop and ran an extension cord up and under, and then it was just a matter of bringing out the goods. Now a traditional popper needs oil, and with small kids that's going to get messy real fast, so I opted for a small air popper that has a fun vintage look that'll be perfect, plus some popcorn buckets for the kids to use. I then found a bunch of different organic popcorn seeds to try out, some healthy seasoning, and capped it off with some pop and candy. This area turned out perfect, and yes, my kids love it. Now, I am curious if anyone else out there went with an air popper like I did instead of something that takes oil. So far, I think I made the right decision, but it would be fun to know if anyone else went this route instead. Moving on, and everyone's different from a decor standpoint, but I personally like a very minimal look with just a few plants to give the area a little bit more life. And I usually don't put much on the walls, since that's where I want the Ambilight colors to do the heavy lifting. Now after everything's plugged in, download and open up the Fancy LEDs app. Near the top right, click the plus icon and then add device. It should automatically find all the devices in range, so go ahead and click add, enter in your Wi-Fi information, and it'll begin setting up each device. And once complete, make sure to give them custom names so you know which is which like I've done here. Next, we need to tell Fancy LEDs where our strips are and the orientation. I'll first go into the main sync box and then into settings. And looking at the back of the TV, this is the direction I installed the lights. Then go back to the sync tab and turn them on, and just like that, we have matching color. I'll now move on to our first vertical light on the back wall. Click on the arrow bottom right, and this is where we need to tell the program where this light's positioned. I'll scroll down to find the correct spot, but you can get a good idea of how you can literally put these LED strips wherever you want, and then it's this easy to have them mirror whatever part of the screen you want. From here, go back and hit the sync button, and this is now perfectly matching the area of the screen we selected. I'll do the exact same process for our other vertical wall light, the strip we have attached to the Govi Skyline, and finally, the lights that are part of the media console. So going back to our sync box, one of the updates they just pushed is giving you the ability on dark parts of content to adjust how the LEDs react to that. Here I have ambient backlight off, and you can see for this dark area here, the LEDs are off, which is what I prefer. But some people don't like that dramatic of contrast and would prefer a dim light instead of the dark areas, so turn ambient backlight on and it does just that. Another example of this, here our ambient backlight is off and our LEDs are also turned off in the dark areas of this scene. And then with ambient backlight on and set to 18% in the dark parts, you now have a dim backlight if you prefer that type of look. And because every TV manufacturer has slightly different color algorithms, you now have the ability to adjust the RGB and white LEDs to get a perfect match. My guess is most will keep it at default, which is best for me, but it's nice to have this option if you need to tweak things. Now, I'm curious to know if there's anyone else out there like me, because when I'm watching something where people are in the ocean, I want to feel like I'm right there in the water with them. When I'm playing video games, I want to be fully immersed in the environment on screen. If I come home from a long day at work and want to unwind with some lo-fi, I love that the entire room will instantly match the vibe. So that about does it for this one, but from here on out, I'll leave you with the far too many final results. Thank you all for watching, and as always, I hope you have a blessed day. So I've done a few videos on small 16x16 matrix panels. I did a video where I put 4 of them together, and I even converted Govi's new Curtain Lights Pro to WLED and went through a lot of trouble to make it perfect. But in today's video, I'm going to take about 18 rolls of LED strips and turn them into a beautiful 50x50 matrix and walk you through every step. So without further ado, let's begin. Now, after a lot of back and forth, I decided to go with some 12 volt SK6812 individually addressable LEDs that have 30 LEDs per meter. And I did use the 60 LED per meter version of these in my recent Ambilight video and gaming room build that I'll leave links to in the description. But for this size panel that I'm wanting to build, 30 LEDs per meter is the sweet spot when it comes to power requirements, software limitations, and cost. So this right here is a 5 meter roll that has a total of 150 LEDs, and while I'm sure you could spend a good amount of money to make this work with solderless connections, it's going to be much easier to use my own wires, which means I need to remove the JST connector that these come with. And for this, the first thing I'll need to do is cut back the heat shrink tubing at the beginning to get to the pads on the strip. Then I'll use my solder station to heat up the joints to remove the connector. And yes, I had to then do this another 17 times. Next, I have to cut all the strips down to size, and since each 5 meter roll has 150 LEDs, I'll be able to get 3 50 LED runs out of each section. Now that we did one of the rolls, I need to do the exact same thing for the other 17. And you're going to see a reoccurring theme all throughout this video, and the fact that a lot of what I'm doing is by no means difficult, but when you're doing the same thing over and over again, the challenge is to be patient and take your time and not make any dumb mistakes because you're trying to rush. When we have that done, unfortunately, all the rolls also have that JST connector attached to the end as well. So once again, I'll go through and cut back the shrink tubing, pull out the solder station, and remove them just like we did for the ones connected at the beginning. So for a quick recap, I cut 18 5 meter rolls of LED strips into 3 50 LED long sections, and what you're looking at here are those 54 sections and 2700 individually adjustable LEDs. Next, I'll be taking all those strips and adding some solder to the copper pads at both the beginning and end. I'll speed through this part, but if you're wanting to learn how to solder, I made a couple how-to videos that go over the easy steps with close-up footage and detailed commentary that you can check out, and I'll leave links to those in the description. But if you're doing the math, 54 strips, each strip has 2 ends, and each end has 3 pads, for a total of 324 copper pads that I applied solder to, and surprisingly, this only took about 40 minutes. Now, in order to connect all our strips together to form a matrix, I need a lot of short wires, and this probably ended up being the most time-consuming part of the entire project. I'm using some white 18-gauge silicone wires, and I'll need about 150 of these in total. And I did go back and forth on if I should use the traditional red, green, and white combo to make it easier when connecting, but I decided to only use white since I want this to all look clean and minimal when finished. From here, I have to strip back both ends of all 150 pieces, and if you don't already have a nice wire stripper like I have here, do yourself a favor and pick one up. And again, like I mentioned before, so much of this project is simple prep work that once we get done, the actual assembly part will go extremely fast. Now, tinning the wires is the part that I knew was going to take the most amount of time. This involves twisting each side, then applying solder to the exposed strands. It actually is a very easy process, but doing it 300 times took about an hour and a half total. So tinning the wire is what makes it possible for the wire to get connected to the solder on each pad of the LED strip that we did earlier on. And since the now tinned wire is longer than what's needed, I always like to trim it down to about the size of the pad for a more professional look. And we aren't going to be connecting anything quite yet, but I will be cutting these all down to the length needed. And thankfully the step went by pretty quick and only took about 20 minutes. Moving on, and the most frustrating part of this build was figuring out how to mount a massive number of LEDs cleanly, eliminating loose wires while still creating a design that truly stands out. I first picked up some 1x2 by 6 foot long boards that I cut down to about 5.5 feet, stacked 2 of them on top of each other, and then used my brad nailer to connect. Then I bought some 8 foot long board and batten panels that I cut down to 6 feet and connected those together on top of the wood frames that we just set up. And as you can see, I'm purposely leaving some overhang around the entire perimeter underneath the panels, which you'll see why I'm doing that later on. Next, I removed the 2 outer panels to make sure everything was lined up and even, then used the nail gun to attach the board and batten pieces to the frame underneath. Moving on, and this is probably one of the most important parts, because for a matrix panel, you want every single LED to be equally spaced from one another. What I mean by this is that the distance from here to here should be the same as the distance from here to here. So after doing the measurements, I mapped out every point along the line where I'll be sticking each LED strip so that all the spacing is correct. Once I was done with the top, I did the exact same thing on the bottom. With all my measurements done, I propped it up against the wall and used a long piece of wood and a level to make sure my coordinates were accurate, and connected the dots together like I'm doing here. And having this physical line to follow is going to make my life much easier here shortly. And this step took about 45 minutes to complete, and any of you out there that are getting up in age, you already know how bad my knees were hurting when I finally stood up here. Now, pretty much all adjustable LED strips will have arrows on them, and you'll need to pay close attention here. I plan on having this matrix panel start bottom left, so this first strip needs to have the arrows pointing up since the data moves away from the controller that I'll eventually be setting up. And for the next strip, the arrows will be pointing back down, and we'll repeat this up-down pattern for all 50 strips. And hopefully here you can see how spending the extra time to measure out all your lines beforehand is going to make this step much easier than doing it as you go, but at the end of the day, it still took about an hour and a half to get these stuck on. So because I used a pencil to mark all the lines, I ended up with a bunch of smudges. I bought a couple magic white erasers and went over the entire panel to get rid of anything that had smeared. Next, I used some painter's tape right above the top part of the LEDs and measured out a line that was straight across. Then I took out my 1/2-inch Forstner bit, stuck some wood underneath to help with tear out, and began the daunting task of drilling 50 holes right above the LED strips. And if anyone has any suggestions and if there's a better tool or process for this that makes clean cuts, I'm all ears. Once that was done, I took out the shop vac and cleaned up the mess. And then I peeled back the tape. And even though the Forstner bit did take a good amount of time, it got the job done and it didn't destroy the panel. And yes, you will have to do the exact same thing on the bottom. Now, depending on how picky you are, you might want to dress up the holes we just made. I found some 1/2-inch white rubber grommets that should do the trick. So this is where things really start to come together. I'll set up the soldering station and begin to connect everything up top. And because I went with all white wires and it'd be very easy to mix things up, I'm going to start by doing just one wire at a time, which will be connected to the voltage pads. This right here is the end of our first LED strip. And after I have it connected to the voltage pad, it'll get fed down the hole directly above, over, and out the opening at the beginning of strip number 2 that has the arrows pointing down, where we can connect the wire to this voltage pad. Next, I'll move the camera in closer so you can get a better idea of what I'm doing. Here I'm connecting a new wire to the end of strip number 3's voltage pad, feeding it through the hole above strip number 4, and connecting it to that voltage pad. Then it was just a matter of doing the exact same thing down the line, but again, going slow enough not to make any silly mistakes because you're trying to speed through it. Once this was done, I'm going to go back and do the same thing, but this time the middle data section is what I'll be connecting. And finally, I'll go down the top one more time doing our ground to ground. With the top part finished, I can move down to the bottom and do pretty much exactly what I just did all over again. And guys, I promise you, if you're wanting to get better at soldering, after this project, you'll for sure be a pro. Alright, so here's what I have so far, and I know for anyone that's tinkered with LEDs before, I'm sure you're easily able to follow along. But for anyone where this is all new, let's go back to my little example to explain what I just did. The bottom left is going to be our starting point. The arrows are pointing up on this first strip. At the end, this is where we connected our voltage, data, and ground wire to strip number 2, where the arrows are pointing down. At the bottom of this strip, we connected the voltage, data, and ground wire to the bottom of strip number 3, where the arrows are again pointing up. There are different ways you can set up a matrix, but this back and forth method that's called serpentine is what I normally use. From here I'll be flipping the matrix to the backside to get at the wires so I can begin prepping everything for power and data, which I'll cover here shortly. Now because I want to keep things as simple as possible and only deal with the wires at the bottom, I'm going to be counting 14 LED strips over from the beginning and cutting the wires in the middle. Then count 12 over, make another cut, another 12, and then a final cut. I'll flip the panel back around and pull out all the wires that I just cut, and here I'll be marking them so I know which wires connected where. I'm using black as ground, I'll use purple for data, and then I'll leave the voltage one blank. And this is where if you did use different colored wires instead of all white, you wouldn't have to do this step since everything would be color coordinated, but all white wires are definitely going to give us a much cleaner looking end result. After that, I still need to attach some wires to our very beginning LED strip at the bottom left, and I'll be marking these up as well. Next, I'll flip it back over, and for our beginning wires I just attached, I'll be stripping those back and connecting some inline wagos to the voltage, data, and ground lines. Then for our first cut on the right side, I'll strip back the voltage and ground wire, but I won't do anything for the data line. And on the left side, I will be stripping back all 3 of those. I'll take a 3-slot Wago and reconnect the ground lines together, take another 3-slot Wago and connect the voltage lines, and then a 2-slot or another inline Wago to attach to the data line on the left side. I'll be doing the same thing for the last 2 cuts I made, and this will make a little bit more sense here shortly, but what I'm basically doing is splitting the matrix panel into 4 separate data runs, and I'm hoping to make this as easy as possible by doing only power injections at those same spots. So for controlling all the lights, I'll be using Glidopto's 4D Elite controller that comes pre-installed with WLED. This is currently their flagship model, and I've used this in a ton of my projects and I've had 0 issues. This particular model has 4 data outputs, which will be perfect for this install, and it has lots of different power options, but I'm going to try keeping this super simple and only using one single supply. The first thing I'll do is open up the voltage lever on the right side, and for anyone that hasn't used this controller yet, just a heads up, this is not open. It might feel like it's open because there's some resistance, but you have to keep pushing until it's almost upright like it is here. Next, take the included red, what looks like either a 16 or 14 gauge wire, and connect it to the voltage slot that we just opened, and then do the same for the black negative right below. They also include 2 Wago style clips that you'll open up and connect to both the red and black wire that we just attached. From here, I'll open up all 4 data slots, then all 4 openings on both of the Wago connectors. So to make this super easy to follow along, we'll pretend that these 4 sets of wires are the ones that'll get connected to the 4 sections that we just prepped in the previous step. And for this example, green will represent data, red will be voltage, and white will be ground. I'll take our first grouping of wires and get those connected to what will be the very beginning strip of our matrix panel like I'm doing here. And because we have all the wires marked, it should be easy to make sure they're going to the correct spot. Moving down, our next 3 wires will get connected here. The red wire will go into the last opening in our voltage Wago, the white wire into the last opening of our ground Wago, and our green line into the data. Then I'll be doing the exact same thing for my last 2 cut points. Now it's super easy to get everything connected to our controller because all I have to do is connect all my red voltage lines in any order to the red voltage Wago, all my white ground wires to the ground Wago, and then my first green data line goes into GPIO 16, the second into GPIO 12, the third into GPIO 4, and the last into GPIO 2. And I wanted to first explain it close up so you can understand how easy this actually is, because if you just saw what I'm doing here, especially if you're a beginner, you would just naturally assume it's complicated, but hopefully the way I explained it did a good job of simplifying the process. And then here's another visual of exactly what I just did. For this next part, I didn't put too much thought into it, but I wanted to build something that would hold the controller and power supply on the back so it would stay completely out of sight. Nothing fancy here, but after using a couple more pieces of wood and using some cable clips to tidy up the wires, I have something that should do the trick. Moving on to power, and I'll be using this high quality 12 volt 12.5 amp supply that you can plug into the left side of the controller like I'm doing here. And remember, since we are using 12 volt LED strips, you do have to use a 12 volt power supply, and as always, I'll leave links to everything I'm using in the description. I'll also be using an extension cord that has a flat plug so it won't jet out and hit the back side of the panel when I plug it in. I did forget to mention I added a couple pieces of small wood on either side that'll eventually be resting on my wall, and so my wall doesn't get scratched up, I'll put some felt pads on it. Now to mount this on my wall, I'll be using the French cleat method where I'll be cutting 2 pieces of wood at a 45-degree angle. This seemed like about the easiest way to do this so that the matrix panel itself is not actually screwed into the wall and can be moved around to any other French cleat that I want to put up around my house. Here I'm attaching the first piece of wood to my wall, making sure to hit the studs. Then I'll install the second one on the back of the matrix panel. From here I'll get everything into position, plug it in, and then have my lovely wife who puts up with all my crazy project ideas help me lift it into the cleat. And just like that, we have a 50x50 matrix panel with 2500 individually addressable LEDs set up with no visible wires, and I can't wait to fire this up to see if it will actually work with just a single controller and single power supply. So once you download and set up WLED to your home network, go into Config, LED Preferences, and I have the brightness limiter turned on and set to 11,000 milliamps. Further down, we need to tell the program what type of strips we're using and how many LEDs are connected to each data output. Make sure to select SK6812 for the strip type. I have it set to 12 volts for the milliamp LED. Color order is GRB. The number of strips that we set up on this before making our first cut was 14, and with 50 LEDs per strip, that gives us 700 LEDs that are connected to our GPIO 16 data slot. I also changed auto calculate to dual. Our next data output is GPIO 12, and do everything the same except the LEDs connected to this one is 600. GPIO 4 is the same as above with again 600 LEDs. And then finally with GPIO 2, once again it's the same with 600 LEDs. Hit save, and then we're going to go to 2D configuration. Make sure 2D matrix is selected, the number of panels is 1, our first LED is bottom left, the strips are in a vertical orientation, serpentine is checked, which is the up-down configuration I went with, put the dimensions at 50 by 50, hit save, and we're officially ready to test this out. So when I turned it on, I was actually really surprised that everything worked first try, which means I made 0 mistakes on connecting the wires, I didn't have any bad solder joints, and there were 0 defective strips. I'll go ahead and play some of my favorite examples, but one of the reasons I wanted to do this is because WLED just released probably their biggest update ever, version 16, which is in beta. This has a bunch of new features including additional matrix functionality on top of their already impressive support. So once that release becomes official, I'll do a full review video of all the awesome things you can do with version 16 now that I have the perfect setup to test it out. Well, that about does it for this one, but I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough that should give you a better idea of exactly what it takes to bring something like this to life. Thank you all for watching, and as always, I hope you have a blessed day.
Testing. 1, 2. Check, check, check.
So my goal is to eventually submit my gaming room to Setup Wars, but in hopes of getting Edgar's seal of approval, I know I need that special wow factor that'll leave people speechless, and I think I have just the idea. Kicking things off, I have here the brand new Librenovo Omni, and this chair is competing directly with Herman Miller's high-end Embody, but at half the price. And make sure to stay tuned after the big final reveal, since I'll share my overall thoughts on this chair after having it for over a month now as my daily driver. Now, finding the perfect LED strip was probably the hardest part of this project. I first thought about using a regular SK6812 strip that has 60 LEDs per meter, but trying to attach a diffuser channel to the chair would look horrible. Then I thought about trying some higher density 144 LED per meter strips with no diffuser, however I didn't like the idea of being able to see the actual diodes. I contemplated using some cob LEDs like these, but besides them not being individually addressable, I thought the bare strip would look too busy and stick out in a bad way. That's when I found these 5 volt, individually addressable, 160 LED per meter cob lights that checked every box. The entire surface area is the light strip. It's so small that I'm pretty sure it could end up being mistaken as just part of the chair's design, and since the LEDs are much tinier than normal diodes, I'll be able to run these for long periods of time just using a simple battery pack. Now, because the entire front will be lit, all the copper pads for connecting wires are underneath, and even though this strip is extremely narrow, you actually do get some decent real estate for connecting your own. So the first place that I'll be trying to light up are the 5 legs of the chair. I'll take the strip and figure out how much I need on each and then make the cut. And what's nice about these individually addressable lights is that they do have cut points every ½ inch, so you really can customize these to the precise length you need. Now, like most custom work, you'll more than likely end up soldering, and to make everything blend in as best as possible, I'll be using some 22 gauge white silicone wires. I also highly recommend cutting these longer than you think you'll need, since you can always shorten them later. So these are a little more challenging than your traditional strips to work with since everything is smaller. I'll go over some close-ups of what I'm doing to get a better feel for this step. First, I'll strip back the wires that I just cut and give them a good twist, and I'll do this for all 3. Next, I'll be tinning the wires, which means I'll apply solder to them like I'm doing here. Then I'll cut them down to size to fit better on our strip. Now, on our strip, I'll cut the connector that it comes with off so I can attach my own wires. And again, these pads are on the back, and to get to them, you'll need to peel back the sticky 3M tape. So in case you're wondering, I'm using some high quality leaded solder with a rosin core, and I've never needed to add flux for stuff like this. But if you're using lead-free solder, then you'll almost always need to use flux. I'll leave a link to the stuff I'm using in the description. Just make sure to use a fume extractor and wash your hands with soap and water when you're done. Now I did put a little too much on the pad, so I'll clean the tip and touch it to the solder, and that will remove just enough to where I want them. And finally, attaching the wires is super easy. Touch the tin wire to the solder on the pad, press down with the hot iron, and they'll melt together. Remove the heat and hold in place for a second, and you're done. Here's how it looks from the back, and then in the front we have a nice clean end result. Now when you're using the same colored wires, I highly recommend marking your voltage and ground to make it easier when the time comes to connect everything together. And since we have the 5 legs on the chair, I repeated the process we just went over 4 more times. Moving on to the controller, and I'll be using the small but mighty Maher LED. This supports 5 or 12 volt LEDs via USB-C power delivery, and it'll be perfect for this project. First, I'll remove the JST connector that it comes with, and then I'll take an 18 gauge silicone wire and cut 3 small pieces from it. Go ahead and strip those back, and I'll insert those wires instead back into the openings. And like I did before, I'll mark these the same way so I know what's my voltage and ground. Next, I'll then strip back all 3 of those wires. Now my main goal is to keep this as minimal as possible, so instead of using 5 slot WAGOs, I'm going to see if I can get away with using an inline connector. I'll use a total of 3, one for our voltage, data, and ground. So to first test if this will even work, I'll be stripping back and then twisting the 5 voltage lines together from our 5 LED strips, then inserting all of them into the inline WAGO. I'll do the same thing for the ground and then for the data. This way, all the lights will get the voltage and ground they need, but because they're all connected to the same data line, every strip should be doing the exact same thing at the exact same time, which for this project is what I want. Moving on to power, I went out and bought a few different options just in case some worked better than others. For this, you're basically wanting to make sure it's USB-C compatible because we can plug that directly into the Maher LED controller to power the lights. For a quick test, I'll try lining everything up in a row so it'll be easy to confirm that they're doing the same thing. Go ahead and plug in one of the battery packs, and after setting up WLED, you can see that the lights are working like they're supposed to, and I don't have to do any troubleshooting. I then went on and tested every battery pack that I picked up, and they all worked flawlessly with the Maher controller. So if anyone out there is wondering about the easiest way to set up small portable light shows, it can't get much simpler than this. Moving on, it's time to get these attached to the chair, and I'll be putting one on each leg right down the middle and running all the wires towards the back where everything will get connected. Now this is where the fun begins, because we somehow have to find a way to get all the wires connected back to the WAGOs, find a place to stick the Maher LED, and then attach the power pack all to the frame. And honestly, there's no special tricks or secrets that'll make this all disappear, so it's all about making the wires look as neat as possible, using clips and sticky tape to secure everything in place, and doing the best you can to fit everything together in the least amount of space as possible. So because I'll need to remove the battery pack to recharge it, I'll use some double-sided sticky tape for this part. Then I can simply run a short USB-C cable from the Maher to the power, and just like that, we have the leg portion of our build complete. And just like I hoped, when I turn this part away from the camera, it completely disappears from sight. I'm also going to be running 2 of the same LED strips that are cut longer up the back spine area of the chair. I soldered my own wires to the strip just like I did for the ones on the legs, and I'll begin sticking these on going up. And the key here is to make sure that they're symmetrical on both sides to get the best results. From here, it's just the same process of using some clips and finding the best spot and position for another power supply and Maher LED controller. Now right here, I'm again splitting the voltage, data, and ground on these 2 strips, but when you twist the wires together, they are small enough to fit into the controller's opening, so I won't have to use the WAGOs for this part. And for power, it actually worked out pretty nice. There's an opening underneath that the larger flat power supply can partially slide into, which I secured with some double-sided sticky tape. I'll attach the Maher to the power pack, and we have about as clean of a setup as you can possibly get without destroying any of the chair structure. So from here on out, I'll play you some of the final results, but make sure to stay and watch after if you're in the market for a new chair, since this is one that absolutely needs to be on your radar.
It's been a long time, yeah. It's been a long time, yeah. You and me